with UAB Arts and Medicine, and our mission is to enhance healing and wellness through arts and creativity for patients, families, and staff in healthcare settings, and of course, for the communities we serve. And we'd love to know more about you. So if you would please put in the chat where you're Zooming from, and maybe your interest or connection to this topic, if you'd like. This is being recorded, so just want you to know that. We would love to see your face, but of course we understand if you want to turn your camera off. So now this is, of course, Mental Health Awareness Month. As we know, this kicked off the program back in 2020. And we're choosing this time to talk about suicide, the prevalence of suicide, today, suicide prevention. And when I was thinking about this topic in particular, I was thinking about an amazing program that was offered last year. It's being offered again for UAB graduate students about mental health and suicide prevention. And I just learned some things that, you know, I don't think we necessarily all think about in how we can play a role in suicide prevention. You don't have to be a mental health professional to support someone, and then you can provide them with the resources. So, so we have our experts today, Dr. Tammy Long and Dr. Angela Stowe. Dr. Tammy Long is with the UAB Employee Assistance and Counseling Center, and Dr. Angela Stowe is the director of our UAB Student Counseling Center. So it's an honor to have them here today, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Long.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for that glorious introduction, Kimberly. I am so excited about being here today. And you're right, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this is a great time to talk about suicide prevalence and prevention. And it's my hope that you guys will learn something today that you did not know about suicide prevention. I'm going to get started. Suicide and suicide attempts affect the health and well-being of friends, loved ones, co-workers, and the community. We know that in the U.S., suicide has been among the top 9 leading causes of death for people ages 10 through 64, according to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. While there are numerous factors that may lead someone to consider suicide, it can be prevented, and everyone can be part of the solution. So today's agenda includes common suicide terminology. We're also going to share current state and U.S. statistical data, risk factors, warning signs. We're going to share suicide prevention, and of course, resources for suicide prevention. So first, let's start with our definition so that all of us are on the same page. So suicide is defined as death caused by a self-directed injurious behavior with the intent to die. A suicide attempt is actually a non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with the intent to die as a result. And sometimes suicide attempts result in injury, and sometimes they do not. And when a person says they are having suicidal ideation, that means they're thinking about it, they're considering suicide, they're considering just what that would look like, and they're planning suicide. So learning how to talk about suicide in a hopeful, respectful way actually has the power to save lives. So it's important for us to be on the same page, and I want to talk about using best language when talking about suicide prevention versus stigmatizing language. So a lot of you have probably heard of the term, this person committed suicide. And so when we use the term committed suicide, that reinforces that suicide is a crime, it's sinful, it's immoral. And instead of saying someone committed suicide, we want to use the language died by suicide, or or killed himself, the person killed him or herself. When we say a person completed suicide, this conveys success. This person was successful at dying by suicide. And so I challenge you today to take that out of your language when talking about suicide prevention. So we know that suicide is a major public health concern. So between 2004 and 2021, suicide rose by 48%. And so this chart here is just a depiction of what that has looked like in the past 20 years. Let's talk about suicide in the state of Alabama. So the U.S. national ranking is 14.4 suicides for every 100,000 persons. However, you will notice that Alabama is above the national average of 14.5, and we are at 16.5, which is much higher than our homicide rate of 12.0 persons per 100,000 persons. Let's talk more about suicide facts in the state of Alabama. So we know that suicide is the 12th leading cause of death in the state. We know that 67.5% of suicides completed in Alabama are by firearms. We know that since 1990, Alabama has shown a pattern of higher rates than the U.S. national average. I also want to bring your attention to these stats from 2019. Suicide rates in Alabama were actually the highest in 2019 for those aged 35 to 39 years of age, and for people ages 40 to 44 years of age. And if you'll notice those numbers there, 27.6 people per 100,000 and 25.2 people per 100,000. So this slide here shows us that suicide rates in Alabama are highest among white males, but they vary among age groups. As we look at this slide here, is there anything that stands out to you? Please feel free to put it in the chat. Okay. You'll notice that people ages 75 plus or males have some of the highest prevalence rates. And Ashlyn, I'm so sorry for your loss. Yeah, that's correct. They're geriatric. Well, I'm going to say, don't want to use the term geriatric. Older adults, yes, are higher than what you thought. It's pretty disturbing. So let's transition to suicide data in the U.S. In 2021, 48,183 people died by suicide, and that is one death every 11 minutes, which is too much. We know that 12.3 million adults seriously thought about suicide in 2021. We know that 3.5 million adults made a plan, and that 1.7 million adults attempted suicide. Let's look at rates according to ethnic groups. Okay. So we notice here that Native Americans have the highest prevalence rates here, followed by white Americans. Other than Americans, okay, so other Americans with higher than average rates of suicide include veterans, people who live in rural areas, and workers in certain industries and occupations like mining and construction. Just wanted to add that here. And this next slide talks about rates according to age groups. So there again, you see in older Americans, the higher prevalence rates the national average. Well, take that back and looking at the bigger picture, pretty much all age groups are above the national average here in the US. So in 2021, we know that suicide was the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 14 and ages 20 to 34. We also know that rates continue to increase for females aged 10 to 24 and among males aged 10 to 44 and those persons 75 and older. We talked earlier about firearms being the most lethal method of suicide. In 2021, that was 55% of the population who died by suicide, followed by suffocation, which was 26%, poisoning at 12%, and then other. Okay, so guys, I understand that there is a couple of dark spots on our slides. So if you have any questions, please put those in the chat and we'll be glad to answer those. And Kimberly, if you could share those with me, that would be great. So this brings me to suicide myth or fact. So I'm going to start at the beginning. So the first one, please put in the chat whether this is a myth or a fact. Talking about suicide will increase the chance the individual will act on it. Is that a myth or a fact? Okay, so you are correct. It's a myth. So talking about suicide may actually reduce suicidal ideation. It improves mental health related outcomes and the likelihood that the person would seek treatment. People who talk about suicide are attention seeking. They don't want to kill themselves. Is that a myth or a fact? So it looks like we've got myth. Everyone saying myth in the chat. You are correct. People who die from suicide have often told someone about not wanting to live anymore, or they do not see the future. So it's always important to take seriously anybody who talks about it. What about suicide cannot be prevented? Is that a myth? Yes, I'm seeing myth. You are correct. Suicide is preventable. And most people who contemplate suicide often experience intense emotional pain, hopelessness, and they have a negative view of life or their futures. People who take their lives are just being selfish and are cowards. Is that a myth or a fact? Yeah, it's a myth. They're all myths. People do not die of suicide by choice. Even though the reasons behind suicide are quite complex, frequently suicide is associated with psychiatric illnesses such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and substance use. So now I'm going to take a few minutes to ask you to devote some time to thinking about the importance of creating a caring community. So we're going to engage in a guided imagery exercise. So in order to do this, I just want you to just settle yourself comfortably into your chairs, and then close your eyes or focus on a neutral spot, and just take a moment and focus on your breathing in order to quietly enter the present moment. So again, just focused on your breathing. Let's be present. Now, I would like you to think back to a time when you experienced a personal struggle. You will not be asked to share the struggle. And if the experience that came up for you is too intense, I would simply ask that you pick another experience in which you experience some kind of personal hardship or difficulty. Now, I want you to remember if there was a person or group of people who are especially helpful to you during this difficult time. What did that person or group do to be helpful? What did they say? How were they most helpful to you? And now, I want you to remember a person or group of people who were not helpful or even harmful to you during this time. What did that person or group do? What did they say or not say? And how did they cause you greater harm? So let's take a moment to come back to the present again. And so I just have a couple of questions here for you. So in thinking about that challenge, what did that person or group of people do that was unhelpful? You can either take your microphones off mute, or you can put it in the chat. Angela, thank you for answering that question for me. Yeah, they said it's not that bad. So I also see that Kitty mentioned that the person listened, and that was encouraging. Why do you think we did this exercise? Well, part of this is, of course, well, not part of it. I wanted you to put you in the mindset of a challenging situation and just think about what are some things or people or conversations that you found helpful. And really quick, I'm going to show a video to you.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. I love Brene Brown, but I love sorry. I love Brene Brown and her talk about empathy. And so just thinking about persons who present with suicidal ideation, we want to be empathetic when we're talking with those individuals. So now I want to introduce to you Thomas Joiner's model of suicide risk. In his book, Why People Die by Suicide, Thomas Joiner discusses his theory on suicide risk. He states that those who kill themselves not only have a desire to die, they have also learned to overcome the instinct for self-preservation. That is, wanting death, according to Joiner, is composed of two psychological experiences. So you'll notice above the dotted blue line, the "I am a burden." So Thomas Joiner talks about perceived burdenlessness, a perception of being a burden to others. When people are in that state, they feel that their death is worth more than their life because they have let people down. The word perceived, however, is emphasized here because frequently those thoughts are significantly distorted by the impact of depression or other mental health conditions. You'll notice below the dotted blue line the words "I am alone." So this refers to belongingness. So when someone is feeling alone, they're feeling socially disconnected. And people in this state feel that they have lost key relationships, partners, children, colleagues, and friends. In other words, they have become socially isolated and have lost their sense of purpose. We know that by themselves, neither of these states is enough to move a person to act on the desire to kill him or herself, but together with the ability and fearlessness to inflict self-injury, they become high risk for suicide. So their capability, that's the "I am not afraid of death" or "I can." This is when a person is repeatedly exposed to painful experiences. At this point, sometimes this person or persons may become familiar and access lethal means. And often this person engages in reckless behavior. So when capability is combined with someone who is experiencing a strong desire to die, or feeling like "I'm a burden" and "I am alone," it can actually increase the risk of suicide. So let's talk about risk factors of suicide. So risk factors may be thought of as those things being associated with suicide. That is, people possessing these risk factors are at greater potential for suicidal behavior. So I've already mentioned mental disorders, alcohol and substance use, but a lot of times a person who's feeling hopeless, a person who has a history of trauma, a person who's made a previous attempt. Those are some risk factors. And I'm not going to go through all of these. And of course, you'll get a copy of these slides as well. So those are psychosocial factors. And then there's environmental factors. I mentioned a job loss or a person who ends a relationship. There's a sense of isolation. Those are some, so the sense of isolation and the person having a significant change in their behavior. Those are some social cultural factors. The person may all of a sudden have a loss of interest in activities, work, schools, hobbies. We also know that stigma associated with help seeking is a factor for risk as well. Angela, thank you for those comments. Okay. Now let's talk about some warning signs. So if you notice a person's physical appearance is not the same, it's really deteriorated, that's a sign. Maybe the person decides he's going to give away prized possessions. You may notice the person obsessed with suicidal means. The person may try to access means. Sometimes when a person is happy, then all of a sudden, well, prior to this, they were really in a depressed mood. And then all of a sudden they're calm and happy. Pay attention to that. When you hear about a person talking about getting their affairs in order, maybe paying off debt, maybe getting a will, maybe investing in life insurance, those are all key indicators that the person may be thinking about hurting him or herself. There's also direct and indirect clues. There's some people that will say, I've decided to kill myself. I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. And then there are also indirect clues such as, I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? Pretty soon, you won't have to worry about me. So how do we prevent suicide? We want you to ask the question. And so this is a script of how to ask the question. So I've noticed, and then of course you want to share those specific behaviors, and I'm concerned about you. Are you thinking of suicide? And after the person responds, say to them, thank you for telling me. You are not alone. I'm here to support you, and I have some ideas that might be helpful. So here's some tips for asking the question. If you're in doubt, please do not wait. Ask the question. If you ask the question and the person is reluctant and they don't give you an answer, be persistent. Ask the question again. We also want to make sure that you pull that person to the side, make sure you have this conversation in private. And then as you're talking in that conversation, allow that person to talk to you freely. Let's not be judgmental. Let's be empathetic. Let's give them an opportunity to share what's on their mind. Let's not make it about us. Let's not silverline it. Just allow that person to share with you. Give yourself plenty of time. Don't do it in between a 15-minute break. And then have resources that are ready. And if for some reason you're not comfortable asking the question, find someone who can. Before I turn things over to Angela, I want to talk about protective factors. So there are protective factors. My definition of that includes those are those things that are individual, related to the relationship, community, and the society that can reduce the likelihood of suicide enhance resilience, and may serve to counterbalance those risk factors that we talked about. So, if a person has effective coping and problem solving skills, that's going to be a protective factor. If they can think of reasons for wanting to live and have a strong sense of cultural identity. So, thinking about the Thomas Joiner's model, if you have support from partners, family, friends, or feeling connected to your school and community, you're not feeling alone. And those are protective factors. If you have access to physical and behavioral health care, those are protective factors. That is why we want you to share resources. And then, of course, cultural, religious beliefs or moral objections to suicide, they're actually protective factors. Now, Dr. Stowe.
Thank you, Dr. Long. That is a lot of heavy information, and so much that you were able to put together for us to learn about statistics and signs and symptoms and even what to do and some protective factors. Before I move forward and talk a little bit about suicide prevention, I just invite everybody to take a really deep breath, to breathe in and hold it and then breathe out. If you need to get up and walk around or stretch, take care of yourself because this is heavy. And as some people have shared, this is really personal for many of you. And so it's not, this is a little different than a lot of presentations. It's not just academic and in our heads. It's very personal and touches our hearts and our lives. I have the great fortune of serving with Dr. Long on the UAB Suicide Prevention Leadership and Implementation Team. And this effort started originally in 2018 when the President, Provost, and Vice President for Student Affairs charged a group of students, faculty, staff, and administrators to make some recommendations for suicide prevention for students. Our group worked for a year, and at the end of that year presented recommendations to the President's Cabinet that were not only accepted but acknowledged as really important, and asked us to take the effort enterprise-wide so that it would be not just for students but for all employees and everyone who's part of the UAB community, that no matter who they are, as part of UAB, there's help for them and there's hope for them. While I know many of you are part of the community and connected to UAB in many ways, you may not be a student or an employee. I want to share some pieces of the suicide prevention efforts that we're doing, just to talk about the many, many ways that individuals and organizations can get connected with preventing suicide. We know, as Tammy just shared, about some protective factors. We've got a lot of different areas where, I guess, levels that we're a part of. And so it's really important that we use the public health approach and we use the social ecological model. And that means that we're looking at factors and interventions and education that impact the individual, the relationship, the community, and the society. The individual in particular, when they are in crisis, when they are considering suicide, when they are at their lowest and that they need help, that there are things available for them to get the help that they need. And we also want to look towards the preventive opportunities that we have before somebody finds themselves in that desperate situation. So how do our relationships impact somebody? How can we be better educated, like everyone here today, in understanding what may be happening when somebody is considering suicide, and understanding how we can recognize signs and symptoms and how we can intervene and help somebody? The community prevention levels and societal prevention levels. This is all about culture. This is about systems in place. These are about having policies and programs that create a work environment and a culture where people can get help without fear of consequences that may impact their lives, whether it's professional or personal lives. It's setting up a community where help is available and it's okay to get that help, and where people can practice mental health habits and mental health behaviors that keep them healthy. And when they start feeling like things are not okay, that there are things in place early on that people can get the help that they need. On a societal level, we really want to make sure we have research that helps us better understand what works to help people, but also more about what's going on when someone may attempt or actually die by suicide, so that we can prevent as many deaths as we can. In developing our model, we also use the Suicide Prevention Resource Center framework just to help us dig a little bit deeper in exactly what we wanted to do at UAB to work on ways to prevent suicide. You can, next slide, please. We ultimately have 3 buckets, and this isn't just for UAB. This is in general when you're going to think about suicide prevention. We want to increase the likelihood that somebody will seek help. We want to decrease access to their means, and we want to promote connectedness, which is, I think, what I appreciate so much about what Dr. Long shared, is that this sense of connectedness is really one of the most important pieces to suicide prevention. And so education is really important so that we can identify and assist somebody who may need help. And we want to build life skills and resilience so that people do have the capacity to help themselves, to be able to cope with life's difficulties and connect to the resources they need when they need them. And then ultimately, on more of that society and community levels, we want to make sure that access to care is available. And this is a tremendous issue in our state and in our nation, that having access to the care that someone needs can be very difficult for some folks. But we want to strengthen those care linkages and the ability for somebody to receive crisis response when needed. And then we also want to think about how postvention happens, is if somebody does die by suicide, how those that are close to them are able to receive support as well, and to help mitigate the impact, because there are so many ripple effects when someone dies by suicide. It's such a big impact on the community. So we launched the Suicide Prevention Initiative, really full force, all of our activities starting in the summer of 2020. We wanted a visible campaign, and the messages that are really key for us. And I share these with you because no matter where you are, whether it's UAB or whether it's with your family or your friends or in the community or your organization, these are the messages that are most important. You matter. You are someone. You are seen and you are loved. You are important and you are not alone. That there is help and hope for you. And those are the key messages. The UAB Cares campaign, which is what we call our Suicide Prevention Initiative, also has an enterprise-wide website. And the purpose of this website was to have one common landing page and hub for anyone who wanted help themselves and needs help themselves, or needed to get someone help. This website actually does have a lot of UAB specific resources, but it also has information if you need to know how to help somebody and where to connect them to get the help that they need. One of the things that is important as well is understanding our environment. And we know that there are some pieces and parts of our environment where there's higher risk for suicide attempts. And so what can we do in those places to make it safer, or to also help somebody connect to care that they may need? So we have a lot of signage on campus. This was one of the big things that we wanted to push out. Initially, it was in parking decks, especially with the top level of parking decks, pedestrian bridges and walkovers, that we wanted signage if somebody was considering suicide, that right there, right then, they would have a message that someone cares and they would have access to a crisis hotline. But as we started our signage, we decided we really wanted to expand it to be not just in the parking decks and in the higher risk areas, but really across campus. And so for the past several years, we've phased in more and more signage, starting with student decks, and then we moved to employee decks and employee parking areas and buildings. We've expanded it now to even be more in our graduate and postdoc areas, more student division of student affairs. And then now we are working on our next phase, which the Vice President of Finance did an audit of all of the parking decks on campus, and that includes hospitals. So this is not just UAB, but also the community and patients and family, that we will have signage in every deck on campus, so that no matter who you are, you can access help. We also developed a UAB WOW mental health app for employees and for students, so that it was one place they could go to access all things mental health and additional resources like breathing videos and yoga and mindfulness and relaxation and guided meditation. They could also, and this is actually downloadable by anyone. You can build your own self-care plan. You can also track daily your self-care plan. You can journal. These features are not UAB specific. They're really just for anybody who wants to have a way that you can begin to make sure you're building those healthy habits to support your mental health. And then the newest thing that we're launching, and this really is an effort to just provide as much education and equip everyone we can at UAB with information to be able to help themselves and others, is our mental health advocate badging program. And this is a enterprise-wide effort out of the Suicide Prevention Initiative that offers the opportunity to display, to earn and display badges that you've completed different levels of training and education. And the first badge is the same whether you're a student or an employee, is that you would complete an online platform called Cognito. That is about how to have a conversation with someone who may be struggling with mental health, not just suicide, but any mental health concerns. Participating in the QPR suicide prevention training, which I'm going to tell you about an opportunity if you're not part of UAB, tell you about a way you can do that as well. Really exploring our app and knowing those resources and being able to share that with someone, and then knowing the resources available at UAB. Each level has increasing requirements that give someone just even more information and tools to be able to help someone. And then ultimately our mental health fellow level for employees brings somebody into that trainer level so that they can actually facilitate the education and provide teaching through our peer responder programs or our QPR and mental health first aid programs. So I really want to wrap this up with the resources. The number one resource for suicide prevention is you, and you do not need to be a mental health provider to be able to show empathy and to let someone know that you care. If you notice that something seems off or is not okay, it's super important for you to ask that. You cannot plant the seed of suicide. Someone is already thinking about that, but what you can do is let them know that you see them and that you care and that they matter. That is such an important piece. If you yourself are thinking about suicide and considering suicide, reach out. There is hope for you. There is help for you. You matter. You matter. And so please reach out and get connected with resources. 988 is the National Suicide Prevention, and it's also not just for those that are thinking about suicide, but it's a crisis line as well. And it's available 24/7 to call and or text if you want to speak to somebody. The National Crisis Text Line is also available and free to anyone. You can text UAB. If you're not part of UAB, you can text home to 741-741. If it is an immediate emergency for you or someone else, it's important to call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room so that someone can get safe and they can get the help that they need. I know for many people that are touched by suicide and have loved ones that die by suicide, it can be a really complicated grief to go through. Birmingham has a wonderful survivors of suicide support group through the Crisis Center that meets twice a month. This group has been going on for years and has been a real source of hope and a real source of help for those who have lost someone to suicide. For those that have been impacted personally, a lot of us really want to know ways that we can make a difference, or it is something that really impacts our community, or maybe it's really directed to the job that you do and you encounter a lot of mental health concerns. There's some ways to learn more and to get involved. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention have amazing resources to learn more. The Crisis Center of Birmingham has a number of ways that people can get involved, including being part of their helplines for teens, for adults, for older individuals, that you can be there for somebody when they need help. The Alabama Suicide Prevention and Resource Coalition, or otherwise known as ASPARC, is a tremendous resource for Alabama, and they offer twice a month virtual QPR gatekeeper training sessions, and these are free for you. QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer, and it is a way to intervene when somebody may be considering suicide. You can receive a certificate, and again, go to their website and sign up for their virtual QPR trainings. Again, those are available every month. I just want to end on just everybody, you matter, you are important, and you are not alone. And so please make sure that you know that for yourself and that you know that for others and you're able to share that with others. And so appreciative of this opportunity to present with Dr. Long as part of the AIM Virtual Mental Health Matter series, because this is such an important topic, and it's something that we don't talk a lot about because it is such a hard topic to talk about, and it is heavy and it's not easy, but it does make a difference. It really does make a difference. So thank you. And I think we have some time for questions now.
Yes. So please, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Oh wait, I think we just got one. I'll read it aloud. But John says, I teach the injury epidemiology course in the UAB School of Public Health. I am an epidemiologist, so I'm focused on understanding the causes of suicide. Faced with life's major challenges, such as the murder or other loss of a loved one, some people may consider suicide, whereas this would never occur to other people in the same situation. My questions are about theories about the causes of suicide. A, are there any known or highly suspected environmental causes, such as diet or chemical exposures of some sort? B, are there any genetic causes known or suspected? C, is it known whether suicide or suicide ideation runs in a family? For adults who commit suicide, is there often a history of child abuse, mental or physical, so that the roots of suicide precede killing oneself by many years or decades? It's a lot of questions in there. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts about any of those.
Amy, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about any environmental causes such as diet or chemical exposures of some sort, but I do know that in the world of mental health and well-being or physical wellness, we all should be mindful of what we put in our bodies. I do know from reading some of the literature that, if there is a family history of suicide, that does increase the risk of suicide. Let's see, trauma increases the risk of suicide. So I guess the best way to sum everything up are there are factors within our environment that could increase a person's, I guess, capacity to die by suicide. Those are my thoughts. Angela, what are you thinking as well?
I think it's a great question, and it's very complicated because, we look at, is it biological? Is it genetic? Is it environmental? Is it historical? I mean, they're just, yes, I think what we found is it can be a number of those things, but we can't isolate it to anything specific. I think it's more about the factors that increase somebody's risk. And it's also the factors that increase someone's protective factors. And so if they are connected, they are more likely to be able to use that sense of connection to prevent suicide is one option of that. If they have access to resources, if they have a situation where they can see hope, I mean, I think that's where it's the sense of hopelessness and helplessness that someone gets to a point where they aren't able to see another way out. And that can be for a number of reasons. I mean, we know that depression can have a number of causes. And as Tammy said, factors such as diet and exercise and kind of behavior activation, those things can move someone out of depression. But the hard part is they don't feel like doing those things. And so if they have some other protective factors, such as religion can be a protective factor for someone, even when it can be traumatic as well. Those religious beliefs will push somebody to help themselves or prevent suicide. Whereas if somebody else doesn't have that, it may make it more likely. So it's a hard question to answer. It's a great question. And I think what you did more than anything is outline all the different kind of facets that can contribute to the complexity of suicide.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question actually. When we were looking through the slides about prevalence across age groups, and of course, the 10 to 14-year-olds, we know that happens, that occurs in the country. And I was curious, I mean, when I think about my own children, I have a 14-year-old, and I think about, talking to him when he was at like 10, I never thought like that would be something that, could happen to a 10-year-old. So my question is, how do we start to have those conversations with children? If we have our own kids, that we want to make sure that, they have what they need, they're doing, that we're paying attention. What would your recommendation be to a parent who wants to have that conversation?
I feel like you should start by connecting with that child's feelings. If you notice your son or daughter is in a different kind of mood, I think just having conversation about feelings and that everyone has feelings and kind of normalizing that sometimes people are happier than other times. And just, I feel like that's the best way to start. When I think about my own children in particular, I have a teenager, so to speak. And so, of course, he sees things on the news about suicide. And so if there's a question he wants to ask me about it, I'm available to be there and just be honest. I think at the end of the day, just saying sometimes this does happen to people when they're in a place where they're feeling alone. They're really emotional, they're hurting to the point that they feel like there's not a way out, but there is a way out, and just making sure that your child or children know that I'm here for you. I can support you. I'm wanting to support you. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing something with me, who are some people that you feel comfortable sharing those innermost thoughts and feelings with?
That's great. Thank you.
And I would add to, I think that is just so important to, like what Tammy said, to make sure they feel seen, and that they matter. Also know that they have friends that they learn about who may have mental health concerns. I have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and over the past couple of years have had a lot of friends reach out to say, my child has a friend that's texting them about suicide. And your child or someone who gets that information from someone, that's a lot for a child's brain and a child to have to figure out how to handle. And a lot of times they don't want to tell a parent or adult because they don't want to get someone in trouble. And so they try to handle it themselves. So just having an open conversation and guess acknowledging that kids have mental health challenges too, and that it is real and that you believe them, and that you want to open the door for them to get help and ask questions, and that they're not in trouble, is really important. And acknowledging that, even 8, 9, and 10-year-olds, as much as it breaks our heart, mental health struggles for them are real, but they don't think about it in the same way that adults do. Their brains do not conceptualize mental health the same way that adult brains do, but it is real to them.
Thank you. That was great information. We just have a couple minutes left, but I see that we've got some questions. I just wanted to Ashlyn says, I had a partner try to die by suicide a few years ago. It was in front of me. I tried to stop them. Luckily, the situation was handled by paramedics, but in a traumatic way, and he got treatment, but I feel like I have flashbacks to that day. Is that something you'd recommend the support group for?
I feel like before you actually go to a support group, that you would need some individual counseling first to kind of process that traumatic experience. There is a therapy called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. In fact, we have 4 or 5 therapists that are trained in EMDR. I would encourage you to reach out, and that's where I would start before seeking out a support group.
Thank you. And then John asked again, his question is, how do you explain the very low rate of suicide among African American females?
John, that's a great question. What's funny is when I see that data, I'm always amazed. I would have to do some research, but what does my gut say? I think the African American woman, I think there is a lot of single African American females. And I think because there are that, a lot of times they have to be resilient in the face of adversity, and not that African American females don't experience suicidal ideation, but maybe they have, there's some kind of inner strength that keeps them from going there. And maybe because they are single, maybe there's more so a support system that they can go to. And I don't think that's for everyone, but that's what my gut is saying. I don't know. Angela, do you have any information about that?
Well, I know we're out of time. And John, you've asked some just really amazing questions. This is something that, you really have opened up just how complex it is. But I do think religion is potentially a part of that for some clients and some people. Fear of going to hell, the fear of being damned or judged, or that is not something that is an option to them as someone who identifies with a particular faith tradition. And we know in the African American community that their faith community is a big part of their cultural identity as well as spiritual. And so that potentially might be one explanation for that. And they also may have responsibilities to care for other people, and that obligation to be there for others could be another protective factor. So those would be some other things I would think about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stowe and Dr. Long, for sharing this really, really important information with everyone. And I do want to say that the UAB Cares signs, I saw one during COVID in a parking deck, and I just, it is powerful. It's very powerful. And just, again, when you're in a difficult place, but seeing something like that, knowing that people care and that there are resources, is very powerful. And so thank you both so much for your work. Thanks everybody for joining us, and yeah, take care, and we'll send you those slides. Thank you so much.